The other day, Sayadaw mentioned how restraint by means of the eye, not transgressing by means of the eye, is good. Chakuna Samvaro Sadhu. It is good because it is free of fault. It is clean. And so too, control by means of the ear, restraint by means of the nose, by means of the tongue, by means of the body and the mind. All these forms of restraint are good. If there's no control at all, if one just lets things happen as they are, then just like if there's something important to do, there should be a secure door. If there's not a secure door, if there's a door but no security, then there are sure to be disturbances, many disturbances. So there should be a door, and this door should have a guard. If we just leave our senses without a guard, then whenever there's an enticing object, an object that would cause greed to arise, then there will be lobha. There will be wanting, craving. This is lobha. And whenever there's a detestable object striking at the sense doors, then there will be anger. So there will be no end to the anger that comes. No end to these. And there will be confusion, moha. Every time there's unwholesomeness, akusala, arising, moha is also present. So if there's no guard, then lobha, dosa, and moha, greed, hatred, and delusion, have no limit. They have nothing to control them. And as long as there is not that control, then the opposite of good wholesomeness, that is akusala, will be happening most of the time. During all our waking hours, only the time when we're asleep will there be a relief. That's why the Buddha said that although we see something with the eyes, we should behave as though it doesn't concern us. So there should be application of mindfulness, sati. Whenever there's seeing, one should apply sati. This is what the Buddha said. And according to this, if one really wants one's mind to be clean, then one has to have some type of control, restraint. And if there's no control, then for sure one will come to ruin. So as not to, one who does not want to come to ruin should note seeing as soon as seeing occurs. When there's no control at the eye door, then transgressions occur when a visible object is seen. When there's no control at the ear door, then when something is heard too, there's transgressions. When there's no control at the nose door, when something is smelled, transgressions occur. When there's no control of the tongue door, then when something is tasted, transgressions occur. Same with the body door and the mind door. Mostly where problems happen are with seeing and hearing. So when there's no control of the mind in all these instances, then anything can happen. So control or restraint is important. so that physical and verbal transgressions do not occur. Sati is important, and virya also is important. There should be the knowledge that this is wrong. If I do this, then others will suffer. This action will make others suffer, and it also will harm me. So if one understands this and can apply sati, then this sati, mindfulness, keeps us from harming ourselves and keeps us from harming others. One has to develop this sati bit by bit, and only if sati is present will there be purity of mind. So without sati, in the moment of seeing, in the moment of hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, then one will just react in whatever way one wants. With speech, one will say whatever one wants. And so, in every type of instance, if there's no control and if one transgresses, then there's nothing to be satisfied with this. There's nothing to be satisfied with in our behavior if there's complete lack of restraint. That's why the Buddha said, so that akusala doesn't develop, so that unwholesomeness doesn't arise and multiply, control, restraint by means of the eye is good. Restraint by means of the ear is good. And when we apply this practically, we come to see the benefits. But because the yogis are careless, they don't know yet that restraint is beneficial, that control of one's sense faculties is beneficial. When there's one moment of restraint occurring one by one, then one's behavior, if one's seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling, so on, is free of blame. And this is valuable. But if one is careless about applying the practice, if one doesn't respect sila, or if one doesn't value control of the mind, restraint of the mind, if one doesn't value the cleanliness, the purity that comes from restraint, then one will just perform actions quickly. Bending, one will bend one's arm quickly, stretch quickly, stand up, sit down quickly, without applying the control of sati. Since the time that the yogis have arrived, Sayadaw has tried to explain what the Buddha said about the benefits of the practice. In the world, when one is a human being, what is most important is to be a true human being. And next most important is to have a truly human mental attitude, a truly human mentality. And third, it's important to develop human knowledge and to become an above average human being. The cause for bringing about these types of changes in one are the three trainings, the three sekhas, the training of sila, the training of samadhi, and the training of panya, the trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. When one has no moral shame or moral fear, hiri and ottappa, when one has no compassion for others, then there will be transgressions. One will transgress. So there should be control of gross. There should be control of gross physical and verbal behavior, transgressions. And this is brought about by the training of Sila Seka. Every day we're taking the 8 precepts, and monks are keeping the Vinaya of the monks. And if our Sila is being kept unbroken, then our physical and verbal behavior will be clean. It will be free of fault, lovable, gentle, refined. This in itself is quite good. Due to the control of physical behavior, physical and verbal behavior, one's behavior becomes clean. Sila is similar to the rules that we need to follow when we're driving a car. If we want to go somewhere by car, we need to understand the rules of the road, and we need to know how to drive. So as we drive along, we need to know the speed limit. We need to travel within the speed limit. And we need to observe the lanes that are marked. If they indicate not to pass, we should not pass. When we come to an intersection, we need to be careful. If the light is green, we can go ahead. If the light is yellow, we should proceed with caution. And if the light is red, we should come to a stop. Our responsibility as human beings is like this. And misdeeds, the transgressions, gross transgressions, are situations like the intersection with a red light. We need to stop at that point before going through that intersection. If there's no control, if there's no restraint of sila, then suffering will occur. So just as when we drive, we need to drive at a normal speed. Most important are our speed limits and stopping at red lights. So if we don't do this, then in worldly situations we will have an accident, most likely. So it's good if we can have the attitude that of not wanting others to be harmed by what we do. So if one can control oneself like this, what the Buddha said is avitikamo sila. This practice of not transgressing is a good practice. And the Buddha said also, Samvara sila. Restraint is a good practice. So one needs to have control of the eye, control of the ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, in order to be free of fault. Being free of fault is good. So one has to be careful about this. One has to have sati. And this sila samvara, the restraint by means of sila, is very important. In our whole life, for all of our life, in order not to have disturbances, sati is needed at all times. Sati is needed. If we have sati, then there won't be transgressions of body and speech, and our mind will be clean. This is the benefit of sati. This is called sati samvara. This restraint, sati samvara, should always be there. And we have to practice, we have to exercise in order to develop this. And from there, we need to have jnana samvara, restraint, the knowledge that can restrain. This is the understanding that if we do something good, good will come. If we do something bad, bad results will come. This is the base of right view of karma as our own property. We need to have the knowledge, the ability to weigh whether something that we are going to do is beneficial or not, whether something is suitable or not. This is the basic knowledge that we need, and from there we can develop further. Misdeeds, ducharitas, are bad, and they bring human beings down. They pull us down. Transgressions cause suffering. And when there's restraint, we can be free of this suffering. This is the basic understanding that we need in order to have jnana samvara. And further, when we encounter situations where transgressions could occur on our part, khanti, patience, tolerance, is very important. The patient mind is able to overcome difficulties. This is known as khanti samvara. If one has no tolerance, to that extent, there will be problems in one's life. And lastly, there is virya samvara. Understanding this is a bad act. It burns. It's stupid. And knowing this, one has the courage to avoid doing that action. Or one understands this is a good, wholesome action. It brings benefit. One has the courage to undertake it. So the courage to avoid what can cause suffering and the courage to do what is beneficial. This is virya samvara. And if we have virya samvara, then we will avoid transgressions and we will undertake beneficial acts and speech. Everyone should have these forms of restraint, these five forms of restraint, and yogis especially need to work to develop these. Physical and verbal actions which cause others to suffer and which harm ourselves are despicable, are disgusting. And a person with moral shame and moral fear, hiri and ottappa, can easily avoid these. Or a person who has sympathy for others, the ability to put oneself in others' place. That type of person also can easily avoid physical and verbal transgressions because they harm others and oneself. And with this, sila samvara, restraint by means of sila, is accomplished. And this is a good foundation. But without sati samvara, without the restraint of sati, then the mind will go where it wants, and it will go where it should not go. So if it encounters something that arouses our greed, then lobha will arise. If it encounters something that arouses anger, then anger will occur. So the mind, without control, is like this. And if the greed becomes extreme in our mind, then although we have physical control through sila, in our mind we will be wanting to kill, wanting to steal, wanting to rape, commit adultery, wanting to lie, quarrel, wanting to say things that aren't beneficial, wanting to harm people with our speech. So this will be happening. And this type of mind is not clean. This is what happens. And these are called pariyotana kilesas, obsessive kilesas. Sila is able to restrain our physical and verbal behavior. But without sati, the mind will transgress every single time. And if it doesn't find something to be greedy or angry about, at least there will be confusion happening if there is no sati. There will be confusion, and together with this, there will be lack of moral shame, lack of moral fear, and there will be the scattered mind. That is, there will be moha, there will be visikesa, ahiri, anotapa, and odicca. So at this point, one will have bodily control, verbal control, but the mind will be transgressing. So these transgressions are called pariyotana kilesas, and they cannot be controlled with sila. They can only be controlled with sati. And that's why it said, note at every arising, always apply vigilant mindfulness. So the mind should be vigilant and be aware every time there's seeing. One should apply sati. Be vigilant every time there's hearing, every time there's smelling, every occurrence of tasting. One should apply vigilant mindfulness to guard the mind. So one has to exercise in order to do this. One has to keep on trying again and again to apply this mindfulness. And when one does it a lot, then this unjust mind will not arise anymore. The unjust mind that wants to transgress. This won't arise, and Sati Samvara will be accomplished. So this Sati Samvara, the restraint, Sati as a restraint is needed. If one understands that these obsessive kilesas, pariyotana kilesas, occur in the mind when there is no restraint of sati, then one understands that sati should always be applied. One should always be restraining the mind with sati. That's why it's said to note at every arising, always guard the mind with vigilant mindfulness. It's similar to having a way to prevent fires before the fire breaks out, or a way to put them out if they do occur. The Buddha taught the training of samadhi seka, that is, the three parts of virya, sati, and samadhi, as the method for controlling the obsessive kilesas, pariyotana kilesas. This method, this training of samadhi, keeps them from arising. And if they do happen to arise, this is the method to use to put them out. Just as when a disease occurs, we need to try to cure it immediately. Or if fire breaks out, we need to put it out immediately. So too, every time there's seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, we need to note, we need to guard the mind with vigilant mindfulness. This is called anupasana. Anupasana means repeated observation. There should always be anupasana. There are 4 kinds of objects that the Buddha said we should observe repeatedly. The first of these is kaya. that is the collection of physical things, such as hardness, softness, coldness, warmth, and so on. And then there's Vedana, which is feeling, the feelings good or bad, the feelings that occur in the mind and body. Then there's the third type of object is Chitta, that is the mind connected with Lobha, greed, the greedy mind, the angry mind, the confused mind, and so on. And then there's Dhammas. These are various assorted natural phenomena or general activities. So these are the four kinds, these are the large field of observation that we observe. So within the field of observation, individual objects are arising ever new, again and again. And since I don't know farming terminology, it's hard for me to explain this. But if a farmer has a lot of land, but then, like if you grow rice, you have a lot of land for developing rice, and that's your rice field. But within that, there's sections that are divided off. So these are like little squares. So the objects within the ever new objects are like these small squares within a large, very large field. So that's an analogy for these four kinds of objects, these four types of objects. Within these four fields of observation, there are individual objects arising. So kaya was the first type of object the Buddha described. And this kaya should be observed repeatedly. When kaya arises, when matter or physical phenomena arises, we have to apply repeated observation. How should we observe this kaya that arises? We should observe it as kaya. That is, we can't observe it as Vedana, feeling, or Chitta, mind, or as Dhamma. We have to observe it as it is. For example, when hardness arises, hardness is a form of physical phenomena. When hardness arises, we have to observe it as hardness. We can't observe it as softness or something else. We observe it as it is. When there's stiffness, we observe it as stiffness. When there's tension, we observe it as tension. When there's rising, observe it as rising. We can't go and observe it as falling. It's rising. And when the falling occurs, we observe it as falling, not as rising. Same for bending, stretching, lifting, moving, placing. All these things need to be observed the way they are. Bending is bending, stretching is stretching, lifting is lifting, moving is moving, placing is placing. And we apply the label, the appropriate label. We give it a name when we observe it. So we need to observe it as it is repeatedly. And observing kaya as it is repeatedly is kayanupassana. In one's body, there's stiffness, tension, vibration, movement. And we observe these and give it a name. We label it as it is. Stiffness is stiffness. But this stiffness isn't just one thing. It's a collection of many, many stiffnesses. That's why it's called kaya. These stiffness, tension, vibration, movement, they're all a collection of many occurrences of stiffness, tension, vibration, movement. And there are many, many tangible objects altogether. So this is, in this case, stiffness, tension, vibration, movement. These are vayo, kaya, the group of air. Vayo means air and kaya means group. So there's also apo kaya, the collection of water, the group of water. Patavi kaya, which is earth element, all collected. And tejo kaya, the temperature element. Because they are all together in a lump, they are called kaya. They're together in a group. And these arise in various actions that we perform bodily. In bending, in stretching, in lifting, moving, placing. In all of these various physical actions, the air element, the combined air of Vayokaya is found. But we just note and know these as rising, falling, and so on. We use the worldly vocabulary for these actions. We have to apply a name when we observe the actions, bending, stretching. We label bending as bending, stretching as stretching, and so on. And an example for illustrating why we do this is when think about how children learn in school. So at first, a child learns the alphabet. And in learning the alphabet, the child has to say the letters out loud individually. A, B, C, D, and so on, if we're learning English alphabet. So at first, this is how the child has to learn. And by reciting the letters of the alphabet, the child learns to make the sound correctly. And then, after learning the alphabet, the child can learn words. So in learning the words too, the child has to spell things out. C-A-T, cat, R-A-T, rat, and so on. And by doing this, the child learns how to pronounce the word correctly. And then this child can go on and learn to read sentences made up of many words. And even then the child may have to read the sentence aloud, word by word. But as the child develops and learns more and more, finally the child learns to read and doesn't have to, they don't have to read things aloud anymore. They can just read quickly. They don't even have to say them in the mind. So it's like this when yogis start to practice. At the start of practice, the yogis need to label what they are observing with the name it has. So they need to apply the label of bending when bending occurs, and so on. So people who have questions about why do we use the labeling should just compare with this example and see that this is useful at the start of the practice. So put the mind on the abdomen with attention. When the rising occurs, we observe that rising. We observe it repeatedly. We observe the rising repeatedly, and this is called Anupasana, repeated observation. When the physical collection called rising, the kaya of rising happens, then we observe it as rising. This is Kayanupasana. And when the collection of physicality that is falling occurs, we observe it as falling. This is Kayanupasana. We can't observe after something happens. After it happens, it's already gone. And we can't observe it before it happens either. before it happens, it's just imagination. We need to observe it right when it's fresh and hot, right at the very moment it happens. So we put the mind on the abdomen, and when it rises, that's when it's happening. So we observe that, we watch at that moment, and we label it as rising. So doing this is called Sati Samvara, restraint by Sati. For today the time is up, but tomorrow Sayadaw will speak about Anapana, or in other words, Sati Samvara, the restraint of Sati, mindfulness. What is the essence of repeated observation? Sayadaw will explain this. And if one develops these factors that are the essence of repeated observation, what is the benefit we gain right in the moment? This will be spoken about tomorrow. That's all for today. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.